Walk into almost any museum diorama about early humans, and the prehistoric job assignments are already finished. Man stands near the cave entrance, holding a spear. Woman sits by the fire, holding a baby, a basket, and possibly one exhausted-looking berry. Nobody remembers hiring a prehistoric human resources department, but apparently it was very strict. That familiar picture is not completely invented. Many human societies have divided work by sex, but the idea that prehistoric men hunted while prehistoric women stayed near camp is much more confident than the evidence allows. Women hunted, men gathered. Both made tools, carried children, processed food, built shelters, and performed the endless small jobs required to avoid becoming a pile of historically significant bones. The first problem is the word cavewoman. It squeezes an enormous stretch of human history, many environments, and different human populations into one damp apartment. Early people did not all live in caves. Caves simply preserve evidence well, while an open-air camp is more easily rearranged by weather, animals, and several thousand years of soil behaving like soil. Still, the crude cave picture is useful because it shows how we often imagine the past. We give everyone a name badge: hunter, gatherer, mother, toolmaker. Then we assume the badges were permanent. For much of the 20th century, an influential story called Man the Hunter treated hunting as the great engine of human evolution. Hunting supposedly encouraged cooperation, intelligence, toolmaking, and food sharing. Because researchers often assumed the hunters were male, the story quietly became this. Men developed the important human abilities, while women waited nearby and benefited from the delivery service. There was a circular problem hiding inside this idea. Researchers expected men to be hunters, so hunting equipment was interpreted as male equipment. If similar objects appeared with a female skeleton, they might be called household tools, symbolic objects, or belongings placed there by somebody else. The artifact had not changed. Only the name badge had. Reviews of Paleolithic archaeology have argued that a strict, ancient male hunter and female gatherer system is often treated as a default despite limited direct evidence for it. Archaeology makes this especially difficult because stone survives and daily life usually does not. A stone point can remain for thousands of years. A carrying basket, wooden digging stick, net, baby sling, or bundle of edible leaves usually disappears. This leaves us with a prehistoric office where most of the paperwork burned, but one sharp stapler survived. So we write the company history around the stapler. Even human remains do not arrive with convenient labels. Skeletons may be incomplete. Traditional estimates of biological sex can be uncertain, especially with younger adults or badly preserved remains. Newer techniques can analyze sex-linked proteins preserved in tooth enamel, giving researchers another way to test older assumptions. These methods have already changed the identification of some prominent prehistoric burials. If you prefer your history with bad drawings and fewer imaginary office policies, subscribe. One of the clearest examples comes from Wilamaya Patjxa, a high-altitude site in Peru. Archaeologists found a young adult buried roughly 9,000 years ago, with stone projectile points and tools associated with cutting and animal processing. Evidence from the skeleton and proteins in the teeth indicated that the person was female. A burial is not automatically a resume. People can be buried with gifts, symbols, inherited objects, or the belongings of someone who was having a confusing day. But this burial contained a coherent toolkit rather than one decorative point. Later, microscopic analysis found use wear, supporting the conclusion that the points had served as projectiles, while other tools showed evidence consistent with cutting and scraping hides. A male buried at the same site was also associated with projectile points. The simplest interpretation is that both women and men in this community hunted large mammals. The Wilamaya discovery did not prove that every woman hunted, that labor was perfectly equal, or that prehistoric childcare consisted of leaving the baby beside a reasonably trustworthy rock. It proved something narrower and more useful. A woman could be a large game hunter, and archaeologists could no longer dismiss that possibility without examining the evidence. Researchers then compared the burial with other early sites in the Americas. Several female burials had also been associated with hunting equipment. The exact proportions are debated because the sample is small, burials are selective, and an object in a grave does not always represent a daily occupation. But the collection makes the female hunter at Wilamaya harder to explain as one impossible exception, who somehow wandered into the spear department. Evidence from more recent foraging societies provides another useful window, as long as we do not treat living people as frozen leftovers from the Stone Age. Different societies respond to different environments, technologies, traditions, and family arrangements. They are comparisons, not time machines. A widely discussed 2023 study reviewed accounts of 63 foraging societies and found documentation of women hunting in 50 of them. In many reports, the hunting was planned, rather than a woman simply encountering a rabbit and resolving the situation. The examples included different game sizes, tools, and hunting arrangements. Among the Agta of the Philippines, for instance, women have hunted using knives, bows, and combinations of tools. AKA women in Central Africa have participated in group net hunting. That 79% figure needs careful handling. It does not mean 79% of women were full-time hunters. It does not tell us how frequently women hunted, how much food they acquired, or whether men and women hunted equally. Critics argued that the study's society-level coding and selection methods could exaggerate how common female hunting was. The journal later published a correction, giving more methodological detail. So the responsible conclusion is not that the old stereotype has been replaced by a shiny opposite stereotype. It is that female hunting is real, intentional in some cultures, and far too widespread to be treated as a biological impossibility. But what about strength? On average, men have more upper body muscle and can produce greater explosive force. That matters in some tasks. It does not automatically decide who can hunt. Hunting is not usually two people entering a forest and settling the issue through arm wrestling. It can involve tracking, patience, endurance, cooperation, traps, nets, dogs, projectiles, knowledge of terrain, and understanding animal behavior. A spear works partly because the point is sharp and moving quickly, not because the mammoth has reviewed the thrower's bench press record. Some hunts favor speed or strength. Others reward the ability to travel for hours, coordinate with a group, carry equipment, and make good decisions while hungry. Human females are entirely capable of sustained endurance activity. Researchers reviewing human physiology and archaeological evidence argue that the physical differences between the sexes do not justify assuming that Paleolithic women were excluded from hunting. Pregnancy and childcare would have affected what some women could do at particular times. That is not the same as banning all women from hunting throughout adulthood. Children can be carried. Older children can accompany adults and learn. Other relatives can provide care. Hunts can be short, seasonal, collective, or close to camp. In ethnographic reports, women sometimes hunt with children present. Human childcare has always been less like one employee guarding one baby, and more like a small group trying to prevent the youngest member from eating an unsuitable pebble. There is also a second distortion in the classic picture. Hunting gets dramatic lighting. Gathering gets a basket. Collecting plant foods can require detailed knowledge of seasons, soils, toxins, preparation methods, and locations spread across a large landscape. Digging roots is physical work. Processing nuts and seeds is work. Turning hides into clothing is work. Making cordage, nets, containers, shelters, medicines, and fuel is work. Much of it is archaeologically quiet because the materials decay. A successful group did not survive because one heroic man defeated an animal while everyone else waited for the invention of dinner. Survival came from a portfolio of foods and skills. Meat could provide a valuable windfall, but hunting could fail. Plant foods, shellfish, insects, eggs, fish, and small animals could provide steadier returns depending on the environment. The sensible strategy was flexibility, followed by considerable chewing. This is why the best correction is not to reverse the museum display. We should not place the woman at the cave entrance with every spear, put the man beside one disappointed berry, and announce that archaeology is fixed. Some prehistoric groups probably had strong divisions of labor. Others may have divided tasks by age, skill, season, pregnancy, status, opportunity, or personal preference. The arrangement could change when people migrated, food became scarce, technology changed, or somebody was injured. Human beings are unusually good at flexible cooperation. We are also unusually good at pretending our current habits were carved into nature from the beginning. And this matters beyond an argument about who chased ancient deer. Stories about prehistory are often used to explain modern life. Men are supposedly naturally suited to risk, leadership, and technology because men hunted. Women are supposedly naturally suited to caregiving and domestic work because women gathered. A weak archaeological assumption becomes a prehistoric permission slip for whatever arrangement already exists. The evidence does not tell us that biology is irrelevant or that every ancient society was equal. It tells us to stop confusing average physical differences with fixed social rules. It also tells us that absence from our old drawings is not evidence of absence from the past. So the cavewoman we were sold was not exactly fictional. Women gathered, cared for children, prepared food, and maintained camps. The lie was the word only. Remove that one word and the whole diorama changes. The woman can pick up the spear. The man can carry the basket. The child can come along, holding a stick that is apparently very important. And prehistoric life stops looking like two separate departments. It starts looking like what it probably was: a tired, adaptable team doing whatever kept everyone alive until morning.